So we are going to be going over your implementation methodology and approach to GHR projects. So this is an RPI implementation methodology. So we want to just kind of give you an idea of what to expect when you go down the road of a GHR implementation, what to plan for. Obviously, if you want a successful implementation, you pick redheads to run everything. You know, redhead tech lead, a redhead PM, and a redhead functional lead. But I'm just saying, you might not, whatever. And I had to put my glasses on because, come on, whatever. Anyway, so what we're going to hit today is, again, what are the prep things that you can do to get your organization ready for global HR? And then we'll talk about some of the project management things that you want to make sure to include. A lot of times project management kind of goes just at the end. You think you have somebody to do status reports and billing or burn reports, but there's a lot more that goes into managing a large-scale project such as this. And then we'll talk about, when you're going through your design, what is best in class and what do you want to strive for? And then we'll move into the approach. Okay, so again, this is our methodology. We've done this a lot of times in this order and approach, and it's been very successful for these not only global HR implementations, but for upgrades, for functional financials, S3 HCM, S3 procurement. All of those implementations have followed this methodology and have been very successful in our eyes.
Of course, every project is unique, and there's no cookie cutter methodology to software implementation. But as a customer, hopefully you find that this tool set is useful for however you plan your project implementation. So let's talk through some of the things that a customer might want to consider even before starting a project, maybe even before purchasing the software and selecting an implementation partner. Infor's global HR application is available in cloud deployment or on-premise models. And even if you are an on-premise Lawson S3 customer, you might consider deploying Infor Global HR in the cloud. It's available as a hybrid model, and that decision really comes down to infrastructure. I mean, would you rather host the infrastructure that the application runs on and take full responsibility for the uptime and maintenance of the system? Or would you rather partner with a cloud provider, handle the low-level infrastructure that is involved in keeping the lights on? We'll talk through a project timeline in a bit and dig into roles and responsibilities. Of course, GHR it's an implementation that is best done with a team that has experience with the project. We certainly don't recommend diving into a self-implementation of this product. It's definitely benefits from the experience of going through it before. And it's important to evaluate your potential partners and see what's the best fit for you. But, even before we go into phase one, it's important to talk through scope. And Melissa, maybe you can help us understand, of all the various products and features and things that are part of global HR and LTM, what is it that we should focus on as something we can reasonably expect to achieve, in a phase one timeline?
Sure. So there are a lot of products, even within the GHR module itself. There's an employee relations module, there's position budgeting, there's your benefits and absence management are now part of that. So when you say GHR, you have to be very clear in which pieces that you're ready to implement, what pieces do you have the resources available to implement, and realizing that you might scale in time when adding any more of those modules in. So maybe if it's a 9-month implementation for a stock GHR, it could be a 12 to 13 month if you're putting benefits and absence management in. So you want to be very aware of how each of those modules could play into your timeline. And then going into the talent management modules, you know, Teresa and I have had a couple of clients that want to do talent acquisition, and whether talent acquisition is their driver for using global HR or it's one of the things they just really feel is important for them, we have guided clients to decouple that from their phase 1 GHR implementation. It's almost as complicated to set up and test for as global HR is, so you don't want to be trying to run those concurrently and having potentially the same resources doing both of them, trying to test through both.
And I think it's important too to look at these as long-term projects with multiple phases. So you might say that you in the end want to implement all these various modules, but it's important to pick a phase 1 that is achievable in the time frame that you can dedicate the resources, and then have a plan to follow up with a phase 2 down the line or immediately after when you are able to dedicate resources to it again.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, one of the things you like to say is just capitalize on that momentum. So if you've gone live with global HR, don't wait a year to start doing phase 2. Put in, you know, 4 to 6 weeks of stabilization time, and then get going again. Give some break time to your staff, but keep them in that same mindset, and maybe, you know, little milestone celebrations and things to keep people engaged.
Yeah. So the core GHR piece is really the foundation upon which all of these other talent management pieces can build upon. Mm-hmm. So what's a general scale of an implementation timeline for the core GHR pieces?
Yeah, so we'll be talking through kind of the phases that you'll hit. We've got them defined here on this sample timeline. This is just a kind of generic sample timeline that doesn't take into account, you know, size of the organization, how many affiliates or other lines of business they may have. This is just a really basic global HR with benefits and adding a performance management module onto that, going live at the same time. So generally we'll kick off, and again we'll go into more depth on each of these phases, but you will start off with understanding your business processes, understanding what's working right and what may have room for improvement. And then moving through to the planning phase, where we're taking all of the information that we've learned from your organization and defining the true scope of the project. We want to put clear barriers around what is exactly happening for this go live date, what are nice to haves, but they're not showstoppers if they do not get completed by go live or by your go, no go decision. And then we move into the design, configuration. The lighter blue lines here is development that's going to be happening concurrently with your IT or your partner, our IT team, your interface development, reporting development, your conversions. It's very, I can't stress this enough, very important to get started building out your conversion files day one. As soon as possible. We've got it happening right when design starts, because you do want to start getting that data into your system for testing. And then we're finishing up with a couple of testing cycles, validation of your system, the way you built it, and then testing with validation of your processes and your data. And then finally going into your no go decision readiness assessment. I think we don't have it defined on here, but a payroll parallel or 3 is very, very important to make sure you plan for timing in your testing. Yeah. You're not doing payroll, but you are taking data that feeds payroll. So you really need to ensure that you've done a few cycles of payroll parallels to sign off on that go live.
So big picture here, I see this sample timeline is just under a year here, maybe 9 months. Mm-hmm. You'd say that's about average for an organization that's doing, not a staggered rollout, but a full core GHR implementation?
Yeah, 9 to 12 months
9 to
is
12?
pretty, just again, complexities with the organization structure really play into whether it's going to be a 9-month or a 12-month.
Of
So you could
course.
have 20,000 employees and still be at this 9-month, or you can have 1,200 employees and you can be at 15 months. And then it's really, what your workforce looks like, a lot of the different rules you may have around your processes. All of those play into what that final recommended timeline looks like.
Sure. And we know that our customers have certain periods of the year where they can't really participate in project
sure.
activity.
Yeah. In HR, it tends to be October through January. You're kicking off your open enrollment. You're going through year-end. Holidays kind of play in there as much as you don't really want to say they don't count because it's not really true working blackout periods. We do find it's very hard to have everybody in one room to make design decisions during that month of December.
Yeah.
So maybe it is a 12. This is a 36 weeks, and this is not 36 concurrent weeks. It could be just 36 working weeks that fall out over 13 months or so.
Okay. Thanks.
So one of the really important components early on in GHR is to get your roles and responsibilities very clearly defined. And we like to do that right up front. Even in the SOW process, we start presenting what you're going to look for. And I think an important component is making sure that you have involvement in the project team, both vertically through the different levels of leadership from your end users, even possibly some managers or employees that aren't in HR, all the way up to executive level, because it is a system that has a way of affecting all different levels of the organization, and also having involvement sort of horizontally across varying departments, so that you have not just your HR staff involved making core decisions, but you're also involving finance and payroll, because this system does impact the work that they do. Also involving your IT staff, who carries a really heavy burden through the whole implementation, and also maintaining the environment once it's up.
And we'll kind of talk about this in the training, but having that IT staff involved in a lot of the functional decisions is helpful. While they may not make the decisions, if they're around and understanding processes, it's a lot easier for them to be able to support it going on in the future when it's turned over and turned on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as we've mentioned, these are very complicated projects. They extend over a fairly large timeline. They involve lots of people from different areas of the organization. So project management and ongoing project governance plays a huge role in the success of a global HR implementation. Some of the really key components that project management with RPI offers is the development and maintenance of a project plan to help keep people on track, issue and risk management throughout the process, evaluating areas of weakness and bringing them to light, and making sure that they get addressed before they actually become a problem that could be a showstopper. We also like to do, as we're getting closer to go live, readiness assessments, looking at the team, looking at not just the software itself and the system itself, but also organizationally. Does staff have what they need to use this software? Are people comfortable with any business process changes that may have been made in the design decisions?
Teresa, there's this cool thing you did at Bassett that's really new for us, the health check.
Yeah.
Just let people know kind of about what we...
So one of the things that we have started with our global HR implementations is taking a look at 11 key factors that we've identified from successful global HR implementations. And periodically, right before the major milestones of the project, we pull our steering committee together, and we, as the leadership of the project team, go through and say, hey, how is our project performing? We look at areas like involvement across the organization. We look at how we're doing following the communication plan. We look at things like, are we making informed design decisions? Are we consolidating information? Just different key success factors, and we actually give a rating for how the project's doing, and that has been a really great way to manage risk because it brings those areas of weakness to light early and gives us opportunities throughout the project to assess them and also put plans in place so that the next time we come around to that health assessment, hopefully those areas are no longer weaknesses.
It's really great. I really love the way that has turned out and the involvement, with the client has shown it's really bringing up those weaker parts and bringing them up to the leaders of the organization that can actually affect that change. Mm-hmm. Because if you bring them up to your project team, everybody knows it's a risk, but sometimes nobody can do anything about it. So yeah, this is a really, really nice piece to plug into the steering committee.
Yeah, it's been really helpful. Mm-hmm. And one of the other components that a project manager brings is project communication. And this is a sample of what a global HR project communication plan looks like for us. You'll see we have a number of deliverables. Some of them are as simple as an email or a report that comes out periodically. Others are meetings with different groups. And we like to do this right up front in the very early stages of the project and get the whole team to agree on who needs to be communicated with, what do they need, what's our frequency, and what's our best delivery method. Because obviously, if you have executive leadership, you're not going to get them in a meeting with you every week. Yeah. But they may want a weekly update email, or maybe not. Maybe once a month is good enough in that organization, and they've empowered project leadership to make all the decisions. So it's a great discussion to have early on and get buy-in. It's also important, I think, to revisit it throughout the project because needs change and staffing changes and
if you realize every week is an overkill and you talk for 5 minutes at the beginning of every week, do you really need it weekly? Yep. So just an evolving plan, communication plan based on the team dynamics.
Yeah, we like to have a plan in place. We like it to be documented, but we don't, with any of our plans, we don't want it to be rigid, where it's something that we feel we're burdened to for the next year and a half, even if it's not working. So that's one of the, I think, big contributions project management makes, is that ability to be high level and look at how the dynamics of the project team are functioning and say, this isn't working for us anymore. Let's take a step back and revisit where we are and find something that does work so we can continue to move forward successfully.
Great. So also in the planning phase, of course, there's a big technical aspect to this since you're adding in a new application into your Lawson environment. We recommend that you get your environment, your Lawson environment, ready for GHR by applying updates across the board. Keep in mind that there's going to be prerequisites and connections between global HR and other parts of your Infor environment. And you do want to minimize the number of overall system updates or extraneous updates that are going to happen during a project cycle. So now's a great time to make sure that you're as close to the environment platform and versions today that you intend to go live on. Build out an environment architectural diagram and a diagram that shows the connections between global HR and the rest of Lawson and indicates which application server is running which function or feature. Of course, if you have decided to implement on-premise, you'll need to install the global HR application. And the good news is that if you already have a landmark server as part of your environment, the application install is pretty easy. It's something that you could do, a customer can do this on their own, probably about a day's work to bring up the GHR apps within an existing landmark environment. Now, keep in mind that depending on what features and functions you are planning on deploying and how you're looking to deploy them, your solution might require an external web server, especially if you're going to do candidate space. So that is an extra architectural element that's going to require your IT group and networking group to get involved to make sure you've got internet access to that box. Pay attention to system sizing and plan on doing some system tuning as your project progresses and people get more hands-on with the servers. Now, you'll need a couple of product lines in your test environment. So since your test environment actually runs more data areas than prod, there's a lot of activity going on there, you might even size your test server with more resources than prod, which is a little counterintuitive. Develop a product line strategy, and if you attended Chip and Jeremy's webinar earlier in the week, you heard all about that. And be prepared for updating the GHR application. Now, unlike the S3 apps, there are not individual patches released for specific screens or programs on the GHR side. The entire GHR application is updated, and those updates are released approximately every month or 2 months.
For the Cloud Suite apps. If you are going on premise, it's going to be twice a year or so.
Okay.
So it's a little different timing on those.
Great, thanks. Those updates, sometimes during a project you need to stop and apply an update.
Yeah.
Based on results you get from testing.
Results or new functionality that's come out that everybody's kind of been waiting for. Be aware of that once you start putting your configurations. We'll talk a little bit about configurations, and you probably already know about them, but anytime you do want to apply any of those updates, there's a little testing cycle that has to go through to ensure that those configurations still work.
So that's just something to build into your project plan, and be aware that you're going to need to do some updates throughout the course of this project on the GHR application side.
Okay, so our phase one, so we've gotten, your discovery has happened, or it's going to be happening, and the planning with your project manager to create all of the scope and those documents happen. So we're really in this already phase one piece, but during discovery, you'll have an implementation partner, consultants go out and just talk through all of those business needs that you have. So the places that are not efficient right now, the places that you're still using spreadsheets, paper, processes that you know could be better, but they're not because that's the way they've always done it, so you continue to do it that way. These all come out through discovery. This is the most opportune time to take this system and not do a lift and shift from your current S3 system or your current HRIS system and put it into a GHR system just to cut down time potentially on going live. We have seen clients that have done that. It's not successful at all because there are pieces of GHR that will not work when you've lifted straight out of S3, which is a system that's been designed for a very hierarchical organization structure and been dumped into a more flexible, agile, matrix-style organization software system. So think about how you really want to organize your organization, your supervisors. How do you report on them? What kind of reporting needs do you have that you've potentially not been able to get or have a very long, arduous time in pulling that data? That goes into different ways of the design and setup, because you can set up for reporting as well as set up for your hierarchical, traditional type of structure. You have that flexibility. You'll go through also some of this competing initiatives. So if HR is out for 2 months on, maybe you're updating your scheduling system. I won't name any names, but if you have an upgrade or you're going to a new organizational workforce management system, that takes those same resources that you're using for your GHR project and pulls them to be working and testing on that upgrade or process. Same thing with your IT department. If you're in healthcare and you're going through a big Epic upgrade or Cerner, those same IT resources that you'll need to support you will not be available to support the HR initiative. So those initiatives will come out, and all that goes into the project planning document and that timeline to determine how this project's going to play out.
Yeah, and often the way we approach it is concurrently while we're doing this early discovery. We're in the midst of project planning as well. They seem to really dovetail into each other. And so some big deliverables that you can expect from project management as the result of project planning would be your project charter, which is usually a 30 to 40 page document that in detail roadmaps really the whole engagement from start to beginning. It looks at the various phases. It will outline project scope to the level of which modules we've individually decided are in or out of scope. It also really defines the high level responsibilities, and we look at staffing at this point, and we have our list of roles and what each role is responsible for, but this is where we put project team member names next to the roles, and we look at what the requirement really is. I mean, is this something that someone's going to do with 50% of their time over the duration of the next year? Or is this really more of a 75, 80% full-time equivalent commitment? And those are all really important, and that's largely how we arrive at the project plan at that point, and also our project timeline. Looking at those competing initiatives, looking at what resource availability looks like. Do you have staff that you can backfill positions and totally be dedicated to the project for the next 9 months? Or more commonly, do people have to still keep up most of the responsibilities of their current jobs and do this as another component where maybe we're only at 50 or 75% dedicated? Those are the kind of considerations that go into the project charter and developing the project plan. And also a really, really important deliverable that comes out of this phase is the technical work plan. And this is where we sit down with the technical team and look at your reports, your customizations, any sort of interfaces, and also the conversions, and really in detail plan out how much work is this, who is able to do it, and we can even take a point there to step back and say, is more training needed for the technical team? Do we need to build in time for additional training on site, or are you able to pick it up on your own or go to Infor? Those are all the kind of considerations that go into that technical work plan. And then if you want to go to the next slide, one of the outcomes that's part of the project charter is this resource leveling document. And what we like to do is look at our various project roles, which you see a few of them listed here, and then take it by phase, and sometimes we even get as detailed as to look by the week and say how many hours are we really looking at, like at what points. And you can see here there are phases where different resources have a higher level of involvement. And I wanted to take a quick second and say part of our methodology in implementation too is we tend to do the RPI resources heavy on the front end and light on the back end. And the goal of that is to, in addition to the training that we're delivering in classroom format, we want to be walking staff in your organization through what this system looks like. So in the early phases, we're doing most of it. We're maybe doing most of the design and the build. And then as we get closer and closer to go live, additional passes, we're backing off and being in more of that advisory assistance role as your staff step it up. Right. And the goal there is we're not leaving you with a system that you have to call us. Yeah, right. We don't want you feeling like you can't administer your own system. We want you feeling empowered and like you can independently go forward when you're live.
Great.
Yes. Do we have a question?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. We might as well.
Sure.
This is a good time. So one question we have is, if you recommend GHR in phase one and doing TM in a second phase, how do you handle the applicants in phase one when it is just GHR? If I understand correctly, you have to implement TA in order to have the applicant in there.
So yes-ish. A lot of times you'll have a current applicant tracking system that for GHR you can just interface straight in. So we won't look at redoing all of the recruiting processes during the GHR time. It is just focused purely on your HRIS system and getting that designed and up and working. And then phase 2, one of our current clients, we're going live with phase 1, and then next month we start the talent acquisition. There's some that we do a little talent acquisition planning within the last 3 months of the project, and then go live 3 months afterward. If talent acquisition is a driver for you to move to global HR, then of course, we're not saying you have to decouple them. We're just letting you know there's a lot of work and a lot of concurrent resource needs happening. And there's a lot of complexities to talent acquisition that can be showstoppers. So with another client of ours, they are doing it concurrently, and their actual go live date has been pushed out over 6 months because of some complexities that talent acquisition has brought up that they needed to work through, or we all need to work through, where if they could have gone live with global HR initially and had plenty of time to work through the talent acquisition stuff and go live with that at a different time. So again, it's priorities. Or certainly if right now if you're using something that is going up on contract, at a certain time and you have to get off of it, then definitely you could plan it that way.
One more. How different are the day-to-day processes in GHR? How and when does training take place?
That is a great question, because I think we'll finish up. I think if Teresa has a couple more things, but our next slide talks right about when you're getting your training, how it's going to affect your design. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, as we transition now from the planning phase into the design phase, actually training comes right in the beginning. This is the chicken and egg scenario with any software implementation. Is in order to make well-educated design decisions, you have to have a good understanding of how the system works, so you really understand the implications of those decisions. So for us, it's really important to make sure that our super users receive enough training right in the beginning, so we can work together to work through design elements.
Yeah, so generally we do an Infor delivered training. So it's the same thing as if you were to go to Infor or take it with them, it's the same materials. What we do is we already know your processes based on discovery, so we try to tailor the training around your processes, what you will be using and going with initially. And we found the most successful way is kind of a hybrid of design sessions along with super user training. So it's not just like 5 days you're sitting in a classroom learning. It's let's go into the system. This is what the organization structure looks like. Okay, now let's learn about the organization structure and what are the different ways you can set it up and the implications. And after that, you can decide, or during that, you're deciding what your organization is going to look like. So maybe training goes over a month instead of 5 days, but so does that design period. And by the end of that, you've made all of the educated decisions to set up your system based on that training element. Yes.
And this is distinct from end user training, which would occur
right before go live. And the difference is your super users are the ones that are creating the system. They're the ones that need to understand implications, but what those literal setup screens are, where to go to do this. Your end users are going to be your managers, your employees. They'll interact with the system not as often as your back office super users. And then maybe you have a couple of people in satellite locations that are HR administrators, but they're not involved really in the decision making. Those people will also be trained right before go live, so they won't lose anything before they have to start working on the system. And you want to talk about some of the technical training that also occurs in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we're going to get into that when we talk through our technical workshops.
Okay, yeah.
But first, why don't you tell us how to make your GHR system win best of breed?
Best of breed,
Yeah,
best
what
in
are some
class.
characteristics of a best-in-class GHR system?
Okay, so, Teresa alluded earlier to having everybody involved in these design decisions.
Yeah.
The end result is a system that everybody's happy with, not just HR or not just IT. The people that are supporting it understand and they feel like they've had an invested interest in it. Your finance team is able to, get the results of payroll and go through and close up the GL books because all the data, the chart of accounts and your accounting units, everything came over correctly. Your payroll team is able to run a clean payroll because they have all the data they need in the right manner. HR cannot make decisions for them. HR does not generally know about what their processes entail. So we find that it's also a nice learning opportunity for all of the people involved to understand how the data works together in all of these areas, to come up with a solution that works well for the organization as a whole. This is an HR system, but it's a part of your ERP system. You can't do financials and supply chain and HR independently of each other. You can, but we've got other clients that are living in a world of hurt when that happens. So we highly suggest, number one, I'm not going to give you a formula for do this, that, and the other, and you'll have the best system. It really is ensuring that everybody is involved. Later on this afternoon, 4 o'clock Eastern, Teresa, myself, Jackie Dudas, another functional consultant, and Jeremy Stolfus, technical consultant, will be talking about tips and tricks to a smooth GHR implementation. And we'll get down in the weeds a little bit more of exactly where in the system you have to make decisions that will make or break your implementation. So join us for that one. And then, coming out of all of this design, best in class, is a living design document deliverable that you will come away with to understand why decisions were made. If anybody asks why something happens, you can say, hey, look, this is what we decided, this is exactly where we're at, or maybe we need to change it in a year because we've grown. Now I know exactly where to go to change this, and I'm not going in and playing around in the system and actually messing it up because I'm trying to figure out where I need to go to change a certain organization structure component to grow the organization.
Cool. So a best-in-class design is well documented and has the input and buy-in cross-functionally, and especially with the finance group and the IT group, who really need to participate from day one.
Right, and we don't want to forget your executives. The executive sponsors that are leading this project have a vision for your HR, not so much software, but for where your HR department or your HR idea is going to be going in the next 3 years or 5 years, and you want to be able to capture that as well. So while the day-to-day people we're designing for them, we also want to design a system that will scale up to what the vision of HR should be in the future.
Let's talk a bit about GHR being the system of record. What does that mean?
So if you're on S3 right now, there is a potential for 2 HR systems. You still have your payroll, potentially your benefits and absence management sitting over in S3, and you're ready to go with GHR in Landmark. And there's this nice little interface that takes, a handful, 16, 17 fields that payroll, benefits, and absence need to process, and it interfaces it over into your S3 system. If that interface is not working correctly, you're left with updating 2 systems so payroll can run. You need to think about what are the only fields payroll, benefits, and absence need to process. You don't want to be creating data in one system and then saying, oh, you know what, I think I need certifications over here, but it's not in the export, so I'm going to put these certifications over in S3 because I might need reporting, or I have an interface that I didn't want to redo. I just left it be because it dug into the go, no go, it wasn't going to be ready, so we said let's just run it from S3. Not best in class, number one, and it creates a lot of extra work and terrible auditing. Your data integrity, you don't know which one's right, which one to pull from and report from and interface from, timing on the interface, all of that plays in. And that goes into that accountability. If you can't trust the data, you don't know which area to trust the data from, then none of the data becomes relevant anymore. So you want, as an HR department, you want to ensure that everybody who's receiving this data knows it's valid. And the best way to do that is pick a system, and that's the only place you're doing your entry, your reporting, and your interfacing from.
Yeah. So let's talk through some of the implications to the finance group on a GHR design. It's really imperative that your GHR system have an accurate and complete GL and AC structure, and that's validated correct. That needs to be loaded during the initial build, but it also needs to be updated continuously. So whenever there are structural changes within GL, those need to pass into the GHR application.
And new positions and new jobs too. If we have a client that's in school district, split funded positions are really important in that arena. And if one person does not take, or one person decides to run with a position set up and not consult the other, so if finance is doing it but not thinking about implications to HR or vice versa, those can get really out of whack.
Right.
So having that process of talking to each other, what does this position look like? Where is it charging back to? Let's understand that.
And that's not just during the design phase of the project. That's an ongoing activity. So now's the time to establish that business process and that formal communication plan for ongoing. And of course, you want to test all of that too. So from a finance perspective, go through that exercise of, let's say we added a whole new department and we need to staff that up. What would it be like, and what would that interaction be like between finance and HR? The making these decisions solid at the beginning part of the project is going to help you with eliminate any potentially bad downstream effects. Keep in mind that payroll data is moving from GHR to S3, and really, the cleaner your initial setup, the better your payroll interface is going to look like. So we do recommend that finance is included in this project. I think just to reiterate, especially through the design phase, and of course an active participant in testing. So let's dig into our technical workshops. This is part of our design phase and really starts to transition the project from design into build or configuration. The technical workshops are something that we hold with a customer's IT team to really serve as an introduction to the technology. Consider it a working training session where we get your team hands-on with the various tools and technology that are going to be used during the GHR implementation to build out things like customizations and interfaces. The objective of the workshop is to scope out the work that needs to be done. This is going to go back to that technical work plan that you had mentioned, and really get you started on designing and building out some of the technical pieces that are going to be a part of your project. We take advantage of some templates that we have available to help work through these items, such as action request flows, the red-blue document for configurations, and our conversion template.
And what is a red-blue document?
So the red-blue document shows, say, for each step in a business process, we look at the screen of who is going to be working on what screen, what are the data elements that are a part of that screen, and which are required, which are read-only, what have you. And the one side shows us the out-of-the-box configuration, and then the other side shows us, where would we want to change this out-of-the-box configuration. So it tells us what configurations we need to build out, so that way our system meets our specific business needs rather than just the generic out-of-the-box setup.
Okay, cool.
Is that a picture of the Tampa Technical Center of Excellence?
Yes, as a matter of fact,
There
it
is Stout,
Yeah.
and I think that's Chip.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at phase 3, which is the actual building of your system. So you've gone through the exercise of talking through all of the business processes, determining, what can change because of functionality that's now in GHR that you didn't have before in S3 or your other HRIS system. And now it's plugging it into the system, setting the system up, and now having a place that you can actually, bring to reality what we've been talking about theoretically for the last probably month before.
And your configuration includes things like limited conversion, right?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of different iterations. Like the first iteration is let's get it in, let's put a couple of fake employees in there and validate that the build looks as we expect it to look. And then there will be a light conversion. So we're not bringing everybody over, let's just bring a sample of 50 people, 20 people, something really light, plug them in and put them through with data that your organization expects to see and can validate, so that these processes go through and you're seeing true, it is working the way you expect it to work. At this point, full conversion is not happening yet.
Here's some rogue bullets that snuck into the slide.
Rogue bullets?
Yeah, rogue bullets. Yeah. There's
Pay
rogue
no
bullets.
attention to those bullets.
Rogue bullets. Yeah.
Tell me about CRP, right? Our configuration phase is leading up to our conference room pilot.
Right. So again, CRP is really more around validating your system design. All the screens work as you expect them to do. Your organization looks as you expect it to look. Most likely not a full test with all of your conversions. This is helpful, and I don't want to say helpful, but it's because conversions are such a big, hairy process. Your conversions are most likely not going to be ready by the time you're ready to initially test out your build. So you don't want to be dependent on whomever is working on your conversions to get everything in before you're able to do your first testing. So that's generally our first phase, a unit test or a conference room pilot. And then we get into, we'll talk about a little bit more. Do we want to hit the next slide here? Testing here. Then next you go into your system integrated test. This is where you want to test apples to apples with your current processes, and it's almost a parallel. You do exactly what you would do in your system from the beginning of the process, and you don't just stop when you stop entering in GHR. You look at downstream the interface. Is it going over? If there's any interfaces to third party, are they getting their data? If there's any reports that need to be generated from this data on a scheduler, that is happening. So it's not just validating that screen works, but that your whole process works. Your conversions must be done by this system integrated test. All of your true data should be in there. Your interface development theoretically should be done by this, so you can test that as well, any of those triggers. And reporting-ish, reporting is always the last guy to get done, so we know that it's in play. Do you want to talk about any of your experiences with the testing?
I was going to say, I think we've been parts of really great testing, and we've been parts of projects where testing is problematic. One of the things that clients often find hard to believe is how long some of these testing periods are. We generally look at a full 3 weeks of dedicated testing for both our system integrated testing and our user acceptance testing. And I think every client I've worked with says, oh my goodness, 6 weeks, like why would we need 6 weeks of testing? But like we've said, it's complicated systems with multiple players, and to get that full complete test where you're looking at all levels and all the different departments, you really do need that amount of time.
And it's scripts we run through in one of these.
Well, I was going to say it's iterative testing too. So you find an issue, and then somebody has to go back and fix that issue, and then you have to retest.
Exactly.
So it's not going through 300 to 500 test scripts is generally what you're looking at. Every piece of the process, your employee space, your manager space, all of those components going in. If you're doing benefits, a couple hundred there.
And something else that we've seen is making sure that security work is really built out for testing. In your first iteration, a lot of times it looks a little bit different. Your system integrated testing is probably just going to be your project team. So you're going to have people acting as proxy managers, proxy directors. You're going to need security roles in place and someone available to switch your project team members around so that they can test in this role and then the next day be somewhere else. So that's something that sometimes can be a little bit of a gotcha as we're getting into testing, not having that fully developed. Also, if you're able to look at testing as a holistic approach, the longer you can have everybody in one room together, the better it is. Because then you can do things like, okay, what would it look like today if I had to create a whole new department? And how do I then hire employees and staff up that department? What would the effect be on my payroll group? And being able to look at the system in that way and not
do
just
those handoffs and say, oh, I don't have to wait, call somebody up.
And run through an interface as it would come up in the day-to-day work, instead of trying to just say, let's get this group of people in a room for 3 days and test all their scripts. And then, okay, we'll move on to the next group. That can work, but the more successful testing takes that holistic approach and tries to make it mirror as much as possible what your
day-to-day functionality will be. After
how the system's used and how people are going to actually interact with it.
Yeah. So Teresa, you mentioned security, and I think that is an important lesson learned, is that as much work as you can do up front to try and design a solid security model, identifying the different kinds of roles and mapping them to different levels of access, building upon the standard templates that are delivered with the system and creating custom roles and classes, it really isn't till people get more hands-on with the system that they're able to really, a light is shined upon what the security model does and how it needs to work. So do be flexible with the ability to have a security administrator as part of testing who's able to tweak the security model as you start to get hands-on with the design that's been created.
And you think about it as a segregation of duties. So you don't want to just throw some class in because somebody's not able to do something that they may only do once a month when somebody else is out. You really want to tighten down your security and mirror those segregation duties and define them. Maybe you don't have those, so it's a great time.
And I don't want to forget to mention, I know we keep coming back to the finance and payroll involvement, but a really crucial element of testing is also to run a minimum of 2 parallel payrolls. Sometimes this is done in conjunction with your testing phases, and sometimes based on schedules or the way clients want to approach it, we would schedule those separately as almost a 4th testing phase.
So I know we've got about 5 or 6 minutes.
Well, we're approaching our final phase here.
We are.
Where our testing.
And this is exactly how it goes during Go Live. Everything gets really, really fast right before we go live.
Yeah, so maybe Teresa will take us through, once we've completed our successful testing, how do we get our system live?
Yeah, so we jump in to go live planning, and I think something that's real important is that this isn't something that happens after testing. This document and your cutover plan, that planning actually is going to start 3 or 4 months prior to when you go live. There's things to take into consideration. There's going to be some substantial system downtime. There's patch and security freezes, and we want to make sure resources are available. So we start that early on, and then with each testing phase, we revisit it and make adjustments as we need to.
Yeah. The Go Live plan certainly needs to evolve as we learn lessons through each migration pass. And when it does come time to go live, this is a very complicated event, and in fact is more than just a weekend downtime, right? I mean, there are go live activities that are starting in the days and maybe even weeks before.
Especially when to get payroll, ensuring you're paying people, a lot of the things have to be done at a certain time. So
we've reached the end of our project approach. And our project has been completed on time and under budget here by 3 minutes. So perhaps we have room for some questions.
So we have a question here about security build for GHR. How do you handle the security build for GHR? Currently, we use a very customized set of rules. GHR sounds different. How should we plan and allot time and testing? This is related to security.
Yeah, we probably all have something to add on this, but maybe I'll start. At the beginning of the project, you need to identify what the various types of people or types of functions or roles are, and then we map those against our documentation and against some of the standard templates that are delivered. GHR, unlike S3, all of the landmark-based applications come with a template security model. It's not a realistic security model that you would go live with, but it's a great start. So it's a starting place that you can then build upon to customize security to meet your specific needs. We do security work up front in the design and get it loaded in the system, but as I mentioned before, this is something that's fairly dynamic and changes throughout the project, responding to your test scenarios.